Get ready to rack up a body count because you wanted to know what would have happened in the Hollow World during the Week of Dread when the red sun went out and the entirety of the Hollow World went into total cold darkness. Here's a spoiler: chaos and anarchy. Oh, and a week-long period of no heat, no light, and no magic. And that's just the obvious stuff. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's get to addressing what really happened during the Hollow World's Week of Dread. I would say spoilers, but this is a major event in the Hollow World and the focal point of the Wrath of the Immortals adventure, as well as the module Millennium Scepter. That module was the start of the realization by players and fans of Mystara of just how devastating that event would have been to the Hollow World, as it was confirmed that the red sun went out. The red sun actually isn't a sun for starters, but a massive gate to the plane of fire. No more portal, no more heat. Considering the Hollow World has regions that are Arctic nearly year-round, that heat wasn't applied evenly, and if you remove it, the entire area is going to turn frigid quickly. You're going to get a nuclear winter for the space of 7 days. The Week of Dread was different from the Day of Dread, because even Immortal magic failed during the week. For 7 days, there was no way Ka or his allies could have done anything to alleviate the death and chaos that would have racked the Hollow World. The floating continents were apparently a natural form of magic, existing before the Hollow World was discovered, so they weren't affected at all, but the spell of preservation was affected, meaning the burrowers for a full week wake up and start digging their way to the Hollow World exactly as created. If a few broke free, there was little in the way for the people there to stop them. The first ones to be hit hard in the Hollow World are any of the races that relied on magical devices. The Black Lore Elves depended on their magic tech devices for all aspects of their lives, often including life support, would have been almost wiped out. Every elf that has cybernetics has them shut down. For those that have cybernetic organs, death is almost instantaneous. Without the robots that the elves require for basic needs, a good number of them starve to death since they can't make their own food. The race would cease to be in a matter of days. With no heat, portions of the area begin to freeze to death. Trees would be leveled to create fires just for survival in most areas. Races like the Gentlefolk, with no preservation instinct, would quickly freeze to death and the Immortals would be powerless to stop it. Animals would be slaughtered for food because otherwise they would simply just freeze to death. With the sudden loss of heat, anything not in shelters would risk freezing due to the rapid temperature drop. The biggest issue is the cold, but the lack of light would be devastating for creatures without dark vision, as they would have to rely on torches and such just to get around. Remember that the Hollow World is a region of eternal light. They have no true periods of darkness, just the dim shadows of the floating continents overhead. There's no streetlights, no torches at the ready, and no stars to navigate by. Farmers would have to harvest whatever crops they could scavenge in complete darkness in a very short amount of time. In a matter of days, most of the waterways would be iced over. The merry pirates couldn't get out to sea because of the iced-over ports, trapping their fishing fleets and keeping them from raiding other cities for food. The Malfegi swamps would be completely turned to ice, probably causing the extinction of the lizard man races trapped there because of the cold temperatures as well as the loss of habitat. The more primitive the culture, the less likely it would have survived in any meaningful numbers to survive the Week of Dread. Total societal collapse would start overwhelming the larger nations in a matter of days. The largest empires would be in a better position for at least a few days before their clerics' lack of answers would start causing panic among the people. This would be especially true for the theocracies like the Azcan Empire or the Nithians, who have established that the Immortals dictate the behavior of its populace. It will quickly become obvious to the Azcan slaves that Adzantiotl isn't answering any prayers right now, and the priests can do nothing but hide. Cue the slave revolt as the angry, cold, and hungry workers decide now is the time to throw off their shackles. The scene would repeat itself across the Hollow World with the Nithians, and to a lesser extent the Millennians, being unable to feed their slaves, and without magical support they wouldn't be able to control them. Even worse, the army would begin to doubt the theocracy's hold on power, with the Azcan priests demanding even more sacrifices with no effect at all on returning the sun. The lower classes would rise up and destroy the power structure. The revolts against the larger empires would be successful, as without the ability to call on the Immortals for aid or protection, the empires would fragment and fall. Though without the structure of the governments, any attempt to feed the masses would be doomed as well. Food riots would quickly spread across most of the Hollow World, followed by absolute anarchy as the masses, unsure of where their next meal would come from, would start turning on each other. The most primitive of the nations would be the first to fall, but the larger, more civilized cultures would be the next. Not every culture is doomed, at least in the limited period of a single week. The Ice Lore Elves are all well equipped for surviving in freezing temperatures, as well as being highly trained hunters. In the limited span that the lack of a sun lasts, the elves would be able to make it through the worst of it. The fact that they can see in the dark is a major advantage in this case. The Schattenalfen would also thrive, as they are subterranean in nature, so the freezing outside world would not bother them at all. They could ravage the Hollow World unhindered, or they could try to make it to the surface world at best speed. None could challenge them because of their natural advantages in this catastrophe. The biggest threat apart from the cold temperatures and lack of food would be the burrowers. Without the spell of preservation, they would no longer be trapped in stasis and would be able to reach the surface of the hollow world. There they could feast on the scattered cultures unhindered, destroying any who tried to stop them. The slaughter suffered from the burrowers would deplete the already plummeting population of the numerous cultures in the hollow world, at least until magic returns and the Immortals could lock them back into stasis yet again. After the week magic returns, the portal to the plane of fire reopens and the heat and light again reach across the hollow world, but the damage is complete. Entire cultures have frozen to death or died because their life-sustaining magic ran out. The theocracies of Nithya and Azcan have more than likely been destroyed in a purge of vengeance by the lower classes. The fleets of the merry pirates are burned in port for warmth. The gentle ones froze to death in their woods without even trying to save themselves. The survivors are just a fraction of what they used to be a mere week ago, and without immortal magic there's nothing that could stop it. That was established in canon by both supplements and adventures. The Hollow World experiment would have failed. This is another strike against the Wrath of the Immortals timeline. That's it for this week's Welcome to Mystara, possibly the most depressing one I've done in the entire run of the channel. Replacing this video on the list of possible videos is going to be Future Immortals, a rundown of the most likely new Immortals coming up in the ranks. And since you didn't want to hear about New Angmar yet, that's going back into the mix to be replaced by making Master level adventures enjoyable. So until next week, never nuke your setting.